when I was watching all these interviews with Tim Burton, he's like, I make everything very unconsciously. He doesn't like conceptualize ahead of time like what things are going to be and like try to put all this symbolism. He just like, he lives movies. So he just like likes to make them in this kind of very free associative unconscious process way and then understand what he did after he puts them together and watches them, which is
Mm.
very psychoanalytic, like also in Lacan light. It's like they call it après coup. It's like you understand what you did after the fact when you look back at like what you just did.
Hmm.
So that's how you start making sense of it. And that's kind of how he works.
Vanessa, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about one of my favorite animated movies, but one of my favorite Christmas movies as well, which is like not quite a Christmas movie. I mean, it kind of falls in between a Halloween movie and a Christmas movie, but it's Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas. But I thought before we dive in, maybe you could just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Sure. I am a psychoanalyst. I'm also a psychologist. So I have a doctorate in psychology. And then I'm from Miami and I lived in New York for the last 10 years before I moved to Sweden. And I've been in Sweden for about 6 years now. And yeah, I'm also an artist and I'm married to my lovely husband, Carl Abrahamsson, who's a pretty well-known occultist. And I also practice magic with him and on my own. So yeah, so we developed a series of events called Psychoanalysis, Art, and the Occult, which is actually how we ended up getting together. I had been in New York and it was like 2014. I was leaving my kind of psychoanalytic training and the hospital I was working in an HIV kind of clinic and like very depressed about the state of the healthcare system in the US and wanting to like talk about it and do some like advocacy and activism around that. And I had this conference on like addressing systemic violence and this kind of thing. And that was like very intense to study for and to put together. It was at Fordham University in 2015. And then after that, I was like, I want to talk about magic and
Hmm.
art and something that's like could give me some breaths because it was such a heavy topic. And then I had met Carl, I think in 2013. And I was like, oh, instead of doing this with another psychoanalyst, why don't I invite an occultist? And so Carl and I worked on putting this event together in London 2016. And that was a great 3-day conference. And then, yeah, we've been together and doing stuff like that ever since.
Yeah, great. I'm curious, what school of psychoanalysis are you coming from?
The institute I trained at was supposed to be very like traditional, so I thought it would be like very Freudian, but it was very like ego psychology, which I did not like. So then I went and trained with Lacanians or studied with Lacanians because with Lacan you're always like ever in formation. So you're like never finished training because you're always learning. But of course, like in high school and in my 20s, I loved reading Freud and Jung, and I really love Stanislav Grof and transpersonal psychology. So like in my free time, I like to read that.
Mm-hmm. I'm not super familiar with Lacan's work. What would differentiate him from Freud or Jung?
I'd say the way he works is very different in that he's looking at it. He kind of built his own world, his own system, just kind of like Jung did when Jung broke from Freud. So the thing I like most about Lacan is that he had an ego psychologist himself, like when he was training. And I now, after I've been through like an analysis for 4 years, 4 days a week with an ego psychologist, I very much understand what he was doing when he was kind of like running away from it. Because, yeah, the ego psychology that got developed in America kind of took psychoanalysis and tried to turn it into, I don't know, something else that's not really like freeing the unconscious, but more like strengthening the ego.
Hmm.
And my view, at least, is like we kind of need to, like, the ego, of course, exists and that's fine, but we can't be like so identified and like hung on to the ego because that's not really healthy and it's not really good to like be very rigid in our defenses. And we need to kind of understand why we're like that a bit. And usually at some point in our life, start to like break that down a little because those defenses developed, you know, due to our childhood circumstances and like ways to adapting to our familial environment and that sort of thing. So I feel like Lacan's work is really good with like helping to kind of identify these kind of internalized monologues and ideas that we have about ourselves that we might not actually believe if we really stop to look at them, but we've just kind of taken them as givens. And I like him because he eventually broke away from the psychoanalytic institutions, being like the International Psychoanalytic Association, but also not really of his own choice. It's just that they didn't like the way that he was teaching and the ideas that he was developing, and they decided that they weren't like real psychoanalysis. So they kind of booted him out, and then he started his own school. And then that school, like the other people that joined him in that school, they wanted to be like approved by the International Psychoanalytic. And the only way the IPA would do that was if he like got kicked out again, you know? So he ended up like getting kicked out or leaving his own school that he started and then just like being on his own. But I think it's much like that's one of the things I love about Jung and like when you're in like academic psychoanalysis, the people like the part that does like study Lacan and Freud, they really like are terrible to Jung. And you know, I love that the Jungians like you don't have to agree with all the theory, but like have a respect. Like Jung developed amazing ideas, and like I think that he's been pathologized in a way that like society has pathologized a lot of magical thinkers, and we need to like get rid of that because magical thinking is really important, especially right now, I feel. And I love that Jung like really understood and created his own kind of system, which Lacan did as well, and which Freud did as well. And they're all reflected of probably their own psychology.
Hmm.
And I feel like people need to understand that, like, of course, there's a period of time where you study the masters and like what they thought, but at some point you should take those ideas and then like make them your own or like make your own way. And that's when you've really like, to me, like become an analyst. Like you really like start using the methods in a way that makes sense for you in your own idiosyncratic way. And I think Jung would agree with that. And Lacan, maybe not
Hmm.
Freud.
Yeah, he had a bias against magical thinking and religiosity and all of that, right?
Yeah, and anybody not agreeing with him.
I'm curious, did you ever get into Assagioli? Because to me, he's like such an outsider, but he's one of those guys who went off and developed his own kind of models. And I think like he's a great example of what you're talking about. Like he had that transpersonal aspect in his models. And I find he's like a very kind of creative and artistically oriented psychologist. Do you ever check out his stuff?
Mm-mm, but I will now.
Yeah, he's really not talked about very much. I don't understand why, because especially with like all of the interest in combining kind of spirituality and psychology, and you know, everyone goes to Jung for that. But here's
Mm.
this guy, Assagioli, who's doing his own thing, and I think like kind of taking those Jungian models and adding to them in a good way, including aspects that Jung maybe was a little afraid to because of his public persona as wanting to be accepted by, you know, science, let's say.
Mm.
Hmm. Well, I'll be interested to hear your Lacanian influence takes on this film and some of the themes. I didn't get a chance to listen to the presentation you did for Morbid Anatomy, so this will be fresh for me, and I'm kind of excited to dive in. To begin, what's your history with this film and with the work of Tim Burton?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, Tim, the idea is that so you referenced the class I'm doing, Morbid Anatomy on Tim Burton's films, and the final installment is coming up this Sunday, and it's been really fun to do. And it was actually Carl's idea that I do the class because basically Tim Burton is like my happy place, and like anytime. I'm stressed or I just need to relax or something and I like want to put it on Netflix, I always like go to Tim Burton. And I never really thought about why. And I actually always felt kind of silly, like, oh, this is me being like a regressed adolescent or something. But then the more I've studied him, the more yeah, I'm glad that I am into Tim Burton because he really like is a storyteller like in the old fashioned kind of telling of fables or folklore in a way that I feel like a lot of movies are not that is not happening. And I don't really know many other filmmakers that are like that and really kind of thinking of these like old like Brothers Grimm fairy tales and things like that. And the more interviews I watch with him, people are always telling him how weird he is and how dark things are and how this isn't
Hmm.
appropriate for children. And he's always like, first of all, what is weird, Like who has decided like what weird people are like versus like quote unquote normal people?
Yeah.
And he's like to me like, being a jock would be weird, or being
Hmm.
really into, something else. So it's like this is all very subjective. And also like all these old fairy tales and fables always had a dark element or some sort of like hero's journey or struggle or there's always something that the protagonist is going through and some lesson that's learned at the end. And so his films are really structured like that. And Nightmare
Hmm.
Before Christmas in particular, that was like that came out when I was 16. So it was like, perfect timing.
Hmm.
And I remember me and my friends all went, to the opening night at the cinema and they gave out these little like Jack and Sally dolls in these little like cardboard coffins.
Oh,
And
amazing.
yeah, it was just like a huge event and it was so much fun. And I had one friend who like collected all the different toys and action figures that came out. And they were just also amazing. Like the Oogie Boogie doll, and you could like unravel him and all his bugs would come out and things like that. The little like lock, shock, and barrel, like clawfoot tub where you could like wind it up and it would walk around. So yeah, they just had so many great things. And um yeah, learning more about the film and his ideas. These were like characters he had started developing as a teenager. It just made me really appreciate him even more. Because sometimes when you like, it's like when you see a musician live that you really like and they're like terrible live and then you just like can't listen to them anymore. Sometimes that happens with artists or, people that you get into, you like want to learn more about them and then sometimes it's a real turn off. So it's always really nice when you learn more about an artist and you love them even more. That's always great. And
Hmm.
I definitely do. And I just definitely see him as like an artist. He didn't like mean to be famous. He didn't like want to be like a big Hollywood director. He just like, this is just like how his path has unfolded. And he's very fortunate, obviously, but also very talented and creative. And has really found like an artist who's found his real true medium and been able to like make these films and be very successful at it. So good for
Hmm.
him.
Hey, I want to take a moment to speak with you about this channel. Currently, only 11% of viewers are subscribed to the channel. I think those numbers are terrible. So, if you're enjoying this content and you want to help out the channel, please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe. And if you really want to help out the channel, you can become a member of the Howl in the Wilderness Patreon, which will give you access to early release of full ad-free episodes, plus access to the archive of the first 100 episodes of this podcast. It would really help me out and allow me to keep creating content like the interview that you're watching right now. Okay, thanks so much. Now, back to the interview. Yeah. We're probably the same age because I think I was 16 when this came out in 91 as well. I'm a December baby, so I was either 16 or just turned 17 when it came out. I can't remember if it came out in the Christmas season or not, but I suspect it
It
did.
came out right before Halloween, like October
Oh, okay.
29th.
Yeah, so I was 16, and at that time I was like super into Tim Burton's movies. I think at that time it had been what Pee-wee's Playhouse was out, Beetlejuice. Did the first Batman
Edward
come before
Scissorhands,
this? Yeah, Edward Scissorhands was a big one, and
and both
maybe
Batmans.
both Batmans were out. Yeah, so I was like deep into Tim Burton world, and I think like one of the things like what you're saying is he's drawing from the old tradition of fairy and folk tales that include dark elements, even though these are supposed to be stories for children. And one of the things that I see over the years is that movies made for children have gotten just kind of softer and softer, and I think there's a real value to having the dark elements in those stories for us when we're young. Um, have you ever read the work of Bruno Bettelheim?
Yes.
Yeah, so he really makes a case for the importance of sharing these kind of stories with kids in their like undiluted form. Um, can you talk a little bit about that, maybe from a psychological perspective, like what benefit you might see in that, exposing kids
Yeah,
to this kind of material?
exactly. I think it's really important because, and not to sanitize things too much. And these things are, they're done in a tasteful way. They're not too graphic. That's another reason I can't stand like watching films that are like really graphic where you like hear knives going into people and things that's like gratuitous like sounds. Like I much prefer like older films where, like somebody steps behind a corner and you just like see a knife and then it's over, but you know what happened, like I much
Hmm.
prefer
Yeah, your
that.
your imagination fills in the blanks.
Yeah, exactly. I
Hmm.
don't need like to hear people getting cut up or see it. And I think, to do it in the way that Tim Burton does, where it's like fantastical and magical and does have dark elements is important because this is all a part of life and you can't like sanitize life too much for kids or they're gonna get a real shock when they're older and they encounter things. So it's much better kind of like expose them to kind of ordeals and things that they may have to think about and get them to understand like critical thinking and ways of processing emotion in a safe space. It's like the same kind of function that play would have, like creating like a safe space that has a transitional aspect that helps them to understand like how to encounter and deal with larger situations in the world that they're going to come up against when they're older, and help them learn to start practicing skills, at a younger age when they're still like safe in their household and yeah, able to process things that way. I think it's really important. And the more you get rid of that, the harder they're gonna kind of get hit in the face when they do come up against something when they're older that is really difficult or upsetting.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it develops a kind of emotional resiliency, to have these kind of
Exactly.
shocks or scares. And then, like you said, it's in the kind of context of the film or the book or the story. And you leave that time and you return to, the normal world again. And you've got, hopefully like loving parents around you. It's to show, but I think like there's something healthy about that kind of fear. Like I remember there was a witch that lived under my bed when I was a little kid. And so if I had to get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, I'd have to leap from my bed as far as I could so that she couldn't grab me. And then the same when I got back in. And I had like a barrier at the headboard of my bed because she could reach through with her fingers and like touch my hair. And I mean, that was my imagination running wild after seeing, like Wizard of Oz at a young age and stuff like that. But the imagination was alive, alive in such a
Hmm.
way that, that witch was real. And I don't know, like it's not traumatic. It's something else, like it's enriching in a way, or maybe it was somehow preparing me for what I'd face later in life. I don't know, but it feels like it would be a real tragedy to lose that in childhood.
Exactly. And it's like with Jung in the shadow, it's like these are aspects of life, these are aspects of self, and they shouldn't be kind of cut off and denied. They need to be like addressed and integrated and worked with and understood.
Hmm.
And doing that
Otherwise,
through art and books and film is a great and healthy way to do it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And like, you know, like following Freud, the return of the repressed, it's going to come back at some later point and reveal itself to you.
Exactly.
And I think I see that in a lot of young people as this kind of constant chronic anxiety and fearfulness of, the kind of social anxieties, just being out in public, intercoursing with other people, all of that fear. And I'm like, I feel like maybe those kids had a really sheltered childhood.
Yeah, or been online a lot and not outside.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, okay. I just want to clear up. This is called Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas, but it wasn't directed by Burton. It was directed by Henry Selick, based on Tim Burton's idea that came out of a poem that he had written and a bunch of like character drawings that he'd done over the years. Like I think while he was at Disney early on, working as an
Hmm.
animator, and then he got he. I mean, he was such an outsider. He couldn't get along at Disney, so he left and he went back and they helped him make this movie, but they thought it was too dark, so they didn't want to release it under the Disney banner and released it under Touchstone Pictures. But then, I think 30 years later, when they reissued it, they brought it under the fold of Disney. So over that time, it's become, I guess, more acceptable, or maybe because it's been so highly regarded as one of the greatest animated films of all time. But anyway, so now it's finally acceptable for Disney to claim it as its own production. But just to say, it was directed by Henry Selick, who's an incredible animation director.
Mm. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And his team in San Francisco seems like they worked for this on for like 3 years on it. And it seemed such an intensive process of creating these characters, and they shot at 24 frames per second. So
yeah, so in stop motion animation, I did that for a little while, and I had friends who went on to work with Henry Selick on Coraline and some of his other productions. But it's basically you're taking a photograph for every second of film. So, well, every frame. So within a second of the film time, there's 24 pictures that make that up. So multiply that by whatever it is, the 90-minute running time.
mm,
That's a lot of handwork. It's
yeah.
incredible. But like
Yeah.
you, like rewatching it last week, it'd been a while since I'd seen it, but it's so comforting to watch movies that are shot on film that are all
Hmm.
done with practical effects, no CGI. There's something about that I love immersing myself in, and I don't know if it's my Gen X nostalgia or what, but there's just something really comforting about it.
Yeah, I agree. It's just like something, it's just more pleasant on the eyes for me. And
Hmm.
like, yeah, the computer generated things is just like it's like too sharp.
Hmm.
It's like I don't want things to be that sharp. There's like a softness to it and more like handheld quality. And like Tim Burton talks about a lot, his kind of idol with animation was Harryhausen. And he talks about, how like you can feel the animators like working with the characters, and it like breathes a certain life into them that he feels really falls flat, with just pure CGI. So he
Hmm.
he continued to try to work with that, in Corpse Bride and Frankenweenie later on too.
Hmm. I think like when I first saw it back in 91, I was really excited because no one had really worked with stop motion in quite a while. And I'd grown up on these great Christmas movies, so like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Frosty the Snowman, that were all done in a stop motion style or a technique. And yeah, also the Harryhausen movies. Like I remember those being on like Saturday afternoons. You'd be able to tune in and see Jason and the Argonauts or Sinbad. Um, and so there's something like nostalgic about it and like an excitement to see someone doing it. Maybe at like the peak of technique because I mean the detail, the amount of characters, their expressions in Nightmare Before Christmas was never seen before. I mean, I think it was really groundbreaking.
Absolutely. It's incredible. And it's really fun. I watched a lot of interviews with everyone that developed it, and it's really fun to hear like Danny Elfman talking about making it and creating the music. And they actually created the songs first and then kind of wrote the story around it. So they actually wrote the songs before they brought Carolyn Thompson in to write the script. And yeah, and Danny Elfman got really attached to Jack's character and was like super excited when Tim Burton said he could voice him, because he started really like kind of seeing himself in the character and in kind of his own hero's journey. So yeah, so it's really nice to see how attached everyone was. But I did also, at first I thought it was gossip, so I wasn't paying it any mind. But then I actually found an interview where Tim Burton talked about it as well. So I'm like, okay, this is true and not gossip. Apparently, like everyone was not talking to each other by the end, because I guess it was just such a stressful process to work on it for 3 years. And so they all like they're all like friends now, supposedly, but like they like needed a little break, a healthy
Hmm.
break from each other.
Yeah, I mean, I watched a little like 30-minute making of doc that was done at the time, and the amount of work that went into like building the sets, like so f- like it starts out with the storyboards, like plotting out the sequence of the film and the shots, and then they would make these quarter scale models of all the sets so they could figure out like how the cameras moves would work. They'd have to figure out where the animators could place themselves within the set because they had to be close enough to the figures to animate them, and so all the sets had to break apart. Um, all the sets were like treated so they looked like the pen and ink drawings of Burton, so everything was like layered with scratches and all this texture. Uh, I can't imagine doing that for 3 years and having to go through all of these checkpoints. Like, okay, you get it approved, like the drawing of it, and then you make the quarter scale, and then that's got to get approved, and then you finally build the full size set, and there's like multiple sets. Like the amount of work must have driven people crazy, but like these people, they must have been just so passionate about the project to stick with it.
Absolutely. It's an incredible undertaking. And apparently, like when Tim Burton did Vincent with Rick Heinrichs back in like 1982, he was really hoping to show with that stop animation that like this was like a viable medium, and he was trying to kind of get Disney on board with like bringing it back and like working with it. But basically, they were like, no, this is like really not a viable medium and way too time consuming. And he was apparently shopping around Nightmare Before Christmas a lot then, like back in 82 or 84, trying to get it made in any way, shape, or form. Like it didn't need to be a film, it could be a short, it could be something on TV, like whatever. He just wanted to get it made. But everyone, he said that's when he started to understand Hollywood, where everyone was like, yeah, yeah, this is a great idea. And like, sure, 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 we'll do something. And then like no one would ever call, you know?
Hmm.
It was too weird back then, like you said. And I think now, I think he's a big part and the team that made this kind of film and like making it more palatable, these kind of eerie, weird things. Because now, of course, like Disney also has like the villains, you know, you can go there and you can either be princess, you know, or Cinderella, or you can get like the t-shirt with all the villains on it. And they have like the Maleficent films and things like that. So there's a kind of trend that, you know, there are people that prefer the villains or the
Hmm.
darker side of things. But I think Tim Burton's work really helped bring that, because there's not too much in like real like pop culture. Like when I was researching this, I was trying to see who else has written maybe psychoanalytically about Burton, and I really couldn't find anything. And I think maybe he's just like too pop culture, and people don't take it seriously. Everyone wants to write about like David Lynch or whatever. But I think like it's important. Like there are a host of, you know, weirdos and goths and stuff that, and of course, you know, now we have Hot Topic and all of these kinds of things. But there is a section of the culture that identifies with this kind of feeling of being the outsider or the more darker side of life, or being a goth. And he really is like kind of the only representative in Hollywood, like in the mainstream of that.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, I have to ask you, did you watch the new Beetlejuice movie, the sequel?
I did.
Okay. I tried to watch it, because I love the original, and I had to turn it off because it looked like it was shot on digital. So, Tim Burton's talked about how he likes to make films quickly. Like he didn't direct Nightmare Before Christmas, but he said like his other films, he likes to work really quickly, and there's that kind of like that aliveness and spontaneity in the film. I think that comes across really well, especially in like Pee-wee's Playhouse. It just
Hmm.
feels so alive and a lot like the TV show, the same kind of energy. Um, uh, but I feel like the HD digital video on Beetlejuice, like I could see the wigs. Like I thought like Winona's wig looked terrible. And I'm watching it with my wife who's a hairdresser, and we're looking at it going, how could they let this go through? Like it just, and so I had to turn it off because I didn't want to ruin the original for myself. But you watched it. So what did you think about it?
Well, I have to say, I saw it in the theater with a friend when it came out, and then I watched it again for this class, and I had to say I like it better after doing this class and like doing all this research on Burton and understanding him more, because it's really basically like Like I didn't look at it that way, like it's a technical aspect of as far as wigs and stuff. And yeah, I might, with my vision, I might not even be able to see that so well on our TV. So I totally believe you on that. But I feel like as far as like the storyline, I appreciated it because it's kind of Tim Burton's. Can I say a bad word?
Yes, there are
Okay.
no bad words here.
It's kind of like Tim Burton saying like fuck it because it's like he's clearly like his early films are clearly like much more like what he wanted to do in his own stories, like Edward Scissorhands and Nightmare Before Christmas and things. And then he was just popular and he kind of got sucked into the Hollywood system. And you can see him kind of battling his like Planet of the Apes, like big blockbuster, and then he wants to do like a little film like Big Fish. And then he does like another big blockbuster and then he wants to do like a little fish, a little film like Big Eyes, you know. So it's like it
Hmm.
feels like he's kind of battling with himself and with the Hollywood system. And this really seems like he just like he talks a lot about in his interviews how he really likes movies like these old kind of Mario Bava films like that don't really have a coherent plot line, but they just like kind of leave you with the feeling and you don't really need to think about it too much. Like, wait, that didn't make sense. This didn't line up with that. He would rather just kind of take people on a journey and he likes films that do that. And he said like with Edward Scissorhands, for example, like people go like, well, how did Edward get the ice to make these ice sculptures? And he's like, who cares? You know, like it's a
Yeah.
fantasy, you know, like whatever. Like, please don't bother me with details like that. So, like, this film, I feel like he really just like, yeah, like he wove in this kind of. I think actually there was even a reference to Mario Bava in it. They were like, that's where Lydia was pregnant with the daughter Astrid when they and takes this like photograph at this as 9 months pregnant at this like horror film fest. Um, and he like weaves in all these things that he just likes. I like the Soul Train. Like where did this come from? It's just like clearly something that he liked when he was a kid. So it just seems to be like all his kind of like whims and childhood thoughts and kind of fixations just like blended together into this like weird movie. And so yeah, I appreciated it more after learning more about him. Um, yeah, and I thought it was I think they did a good job with, I won't give away any plot details, but I think they did a good job weaving in kind of current generation themes and aesthetics and stuff without making it like too Gen Z, but also making it kind of accessible to them. And yeah, not turning off the Gen X too much and vice versa. They seem to try to kind of blend the generations in a way that I'm sure was kind of hard to do.
Hmm. Well, you're making a good case for it, and I wonder, like, maybe there's a way I can run it through like a film filter to soften things a little bit.
Yeah,
I
watch it
don't
on the
know.
worst TV.
I'll turn down the resolution.
Or take off your glasses.
Yeah, just move the TV back a foot or two.
We have a TV, Carl's TV. I don't remember how old it is, but it's probably like 15 years old. And we're just like, we hope this TV lasts forever because it's big, like a film screen kind of TV, like rectangle, but it's not this like bright like LED kind of screen.
Hmm.
And yeah, I think that might also have helped because
Hmm.
I loathe the day that we have to buy a new TV and like have this like really bright screen because it really I can't stand like sitting on the computer all day. I'm one of those people that like I'm only on the computer when I have to be, and otherwise I like to just like be in my house or my yard or read or something. I don't like sit on the computer for relaxation and fun and socialization. And yeah, if our television looked like a computer screen, I don't know what I would do. But I guess we'll find out because it's gonna happen eventually.
Well, I wonder, like, there's been a resurgence in vinyl records and
Mm.
record players, right? Um, and even like cassette tapes, which are like the
Mm-hmm.
kind of like lowest fidelity. Uh, wouldn't it be cool if they reissued like the Sony Trinitron, the big old flat tube screen TV, which was like the pinnacle of tube television technology. I wonder, and then all these like high definition movies would be like softened and like, given a warmer feel. Like maybe that's a thing, or it could be a
That would be
thing.
great. Because I don't like you don't need to see like the pores in someone's skin.
No.
You know,
And
it's
like
not nice for the actors or the audience.
I know, and you can see like the kind of stage makeup now, that you're not
hmm
supposed to see, like if it's supposed. And yeah, it's not a good look for anybody.
Yeah,
Um,
especially when they show like older film, like when you even when you watch like an older film on the newer TV, you could see like watch Edward Scissorhands, and you could see like the little like patches for his scars and things. You could see how they were like stuck on his face, and it's like I'm sure you couldn't see that, originally, but now with the way everything's high definition, and it gets run through it, you can like see these details that you shouldn't be able to see, and probably like the wigs too.
yeah. Well, let's get into the film a little bit. Interested in what the major themes are that stood out to you, and what would make them kind of psychologically interesting.
Sure. Well, of course, the thing I love about the film, and like you said, it's kind of turned into a classic for Halloween and Christmas. So it's like an all fall season film at this
Mm,
point, which I love because I watch it multiple times a year, every year. And also going back to like Tim Burton's childhood, like those were kind of the main holidays that he was into as a child, and his mom would make him his costumes on Halloween like by hand. And she even made one. There's a photo of him in this one where she used the snowman's head from Christmas, but on the top of his head, and made it into like a skeleton costume where the snowman's head was the head. So of the skull. So it's
mm,
interesting how those kind of were blended together when he was, a kid already. And even when he was an adolescent, he used to make money by like decorating people's windows around the town, like around Burbank,
mm,
for Halloween and for Christmas. So these were kind of his things, and his mother's as well. He called her like a suburban artist, where he would like make owls and things, out of like tinfoil and paper clips or whatever. Like was always like making crafts. She was crafty.
mm,
So I think that's really cute that they were blended together, and it's become like an iconic film
mm,
for the whole holiday season. And psychologically, well, if you want to get into Lacan a little bit, Lacan light, we'll say, I think that Jack's main issue is kind of modern man's main issue in that, he's not satisfied with what he has. He's like, he's reached the top of the hill, right? He's the king of Halloween. And he's bored, he's bored of it. He wants something more, he wants something different. And then he ends up thinking that like stealing someone else's holiday is going to solve all his problems. And he gets so excited. But he like turns it into a disaster because he's not really being thoughtful about what he's actually doing. And in
mm,
Lacan calls this kind of longing for something else is like the objet a, and it's like basically like there's something that makes us always be desiring, and it's good for us to always like desire and want more and want to work towards something and be better, whatever, because that keeps us kind of moving and growing and creating. But it's when you don't appreciate where you're getting that the problem really comes in, and the like capitalistic system really kind of feeds on that issue and has
mm,
made it like such a prevalent issue in our society, and that like it's always telling you if you just buy this thing or get this job or get this girl or look like this or get this nose job or whatever, then you'll be better, then you'll be good enough, then you'll have that satisfaction, then you'll have reached the top. But the problem is that there's always another thing you can get or achieve, or there's always someone else who has more or better or is bigger. It's just like it's this endless comparison and competition. And like, yeah, it ends up just like, yeah, we kill ourselves doing it.
mm,
So it ends up being very destructive. Unfortunately, Jack is thoughtful in the end, and even though he turns everything into a disaster, he does have a revelation and realizes what he did and, sets things right, and like everything works out in the end, and him and Sally are happy, etc. But
mm,
for many people, they never get there, and they usually just continue to kind of fight this kind of crime on this capitalistic like treadmill that we're on. And yeah, always feel dissatisfied. Like I remember when I had my private practice in New York City, And one person that came in particular, she had moved to New York City from somewhere else, and she was like, I have the job, and I have the guy, and I have the car, and I have the apartment, and I'm in New York City, and like this is my dream, and I'm so depressed,
Hmm.
and it's like that's because all of these external kind of markers aren't really what you want or need, but it's like the things that we've been told that we should want or need that will end up like satisfying us in the end, and they don't, and it ends up feeling hollow. So,
Hmm. Yes, yes to all that. One of my favorite anti-gurus, Yuji Krishnamurti, used to say, you always create problems for yourself because without a problem to solve, you don't feel like you're living.
mm,
And I think that's basically like the capitalist model is to keep producing problems for them to solve and us to purchase the solutions,
totally.
because it makes us feel alive when otherwise the object of desire could be something more creative and personally fulfilling or contributing somehow to community or society, be a much
Yeah,
better use of our
exactly.
energy.
Exactly, exactly. And in Tim Burton's ultimate themes is always like, finding your place and like how you fit into
Hmm.
society, but not having to conform to do so, just like by being yourself and like learning who you really are and like what you really enjoy and are good at and everything, then that ends up fitting well with whoever ends up fitting well next to you, around you, we all end up fitting together.
Right.
So yeah.
There's a diversity that's celebrated or even allowed there. That's the theme that really stuck out to me the most was well um, there's a shot or a little scene that struck me because it to me it looked like the Fool's card in the tarot when Jack is heading into the woods with
Mm,
his little dog is like behind him, and I saw like that freeze framed as like the fool's card, and I'm like, oh, he's off on a fool's journey here. Like he doesn't
totally.
know where he's going. Like when he enters into the forest, he kind of falls into a trance and snaps out of it and sees the doors that lead to all the different holiday lands. But I was like, ooh, this is like a fool's journey. And when he does get enamored with Christmas and the brightness and fun and joy of Christmas, which is such a contrast to Halloween world, he totally falls in love with it. And then he's so excited that he wants to like, yeah, bring it to Halloween land and kind of do his version of Christmas. But I thought like the big struggle there was that he was trying to be something that he's not.
Mm-hmm.
And I could like totally relate to that. Like when I was, I started working as a graphic designer at like a little artist-run gallery, um, and then kind of got into the advertising world eventually and started climbing the corporate ladder and making more money and getting more prestigious gigs and all of that. But like your client in New York, it's like I got to the top of the ladder and then I realized it was against the wrong wall the whole time. And I was like, this isn't what I want. It's not
Mm-hmm.
like satisfying my soul. And so I could relate to Jack, like in that trying to be something that you're not really, or like having to hide parts of yourself to fit in. Um, so that's like the main theme for me was like him trying to be something he's not, getting enamored with something that's not really like his path or his world. And then yeah, thankfully coming like to realize it at the end and just kind of learning to be content with who he is and what his role is.
Exactly, and enjoy it. No, I think that's really beautifully put, and I think that's a running theme in a lot of Tim Burton's films. And yeah, people needing to learn like, instead of trying to like become something you're not, whether it's because you're like trying to possess somebody else's holiday or because you're just trying to fit in, because of social conformity, that you need to end up kind of understanding your eccentricities or what makes you an individual or what makes you different. And then, running with those and making those really work for you and creating your life, like Dumbo. Like Dumbo's a great example of that. I think Dumbo's really funny too because um, Tim Burton, when he was at Disney, he said his first job there was like drawing the Fox and the Hound, and he said that his drawings of the foxes he had to draw look more like roadkill than like Disney animals. It's just really funny. But he said he just like had to keep drawing these like eyes of these foxes, and then like these Disney's have these like little cartoon like watery eyes that are so like soulful, and he got like so sick of like drawing like Disney animal eyes for 3 years again. That was like driving him insane, and he was like hiding under his desk and stuff. But then when he makes Dumbo a few years ago, I guess it came out in 2019, that animal has like the most watery Disney eyes ever of like anything I've ever seen. So that was kind of an interesting thing that he did there, this like full
That
circle loop.
Yeah, that is interesting because he even did that the biopic on Margaret Keane, who's known
Mm-hmm.
for her paintings of children with these like super enlarged anime dewy eyes. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like when they blink in a cartoon, they'd make the little twinkle toes sound like bleep, 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 bleep. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah, he's like working through some like he definitely like works through issues through his filmmaking, and I think that's one of them is like working through his early Disney trauma by like
Yeah,
yeah, facing the eyes.
yeah, like the kind of the cutesy his like I wonder if there's something there too, like growing up in Burbank just down the road from Disneyland where, it was
Hmm.
all about, the cute and, cuddly. And everything he does is
Exactly.
like anti-cuddly. Everything's prickly
Exactly,
and
and
spiky.
he always contrasts it, and also does make like the anti-cuddly people like his protagonists always do seem more relatable than like the people living in the suburbs. Since he was like grew up in this like suburban place where all the houses look the same, you often see like in Edward
Hmm.
Scissorhands all the
Oh yeah.
houses looking the same, and that theme comes back like the he makes the kind of normal like mainstream reality seem like really odd compared to like
Yeah,
the
like grotesque.
protagonists.
Yeah.
Exactly, which I really
Yeah.
like because I'm kind of like that too. So
I know.
I get it. I'm like, these people are weird.
And suburbia can be very weird. Yeah. Yeah. I love that about Edward Scissorhands too, like the spray painted lawns and the kind of garish pastel colors of everything. It was
Uh,
amazing.
yeah, exactly. I grew up in Miami and everything, like they have like laws about like what color you can paint your houses and they're only allowed to
Uh,
be these pastel colors, you know? And it's just
yeah, to
like,
uphold the Miami brand.
please, no
Yeah.
more, you know?
That's a great point about like his little prickly eccentric characters. They although they may not be cuddly, they end up being quite lovable. And I think
Hmm.
we fall in love with them because they are themselves and eccentric and weird. Like the little kids, what are their names again?
Lock, shock, and barrel. The trick-or-treaters.
Yeah. I mean, they're amazing. And one of the things I love about them is that it goes against I think something like related to what we talked about earlier, like you know, shielding kids from the dark stuff, right?
Hmm.
Uh, so like this kind of, I don't know if it's like it's modern myth of the kind of divine child. Like all children come into this life and they're all pure and good until they get corrupted by their family and trauma and all that stuff. And that's one of the things I like about James Hillman, who's one of my kind of psychological heroes, is that he said, like, look, no, like some kids come out and they're like the bad seed. There's a reason why, the bad seed exists in mythology and Alice Miller's idea of like the gifted child who is like this, pure and divine. Um, these little kids in the film are little shits, like they're little devils, and a lot of little kids are like that. They're little hellions, and I
Yeah,
love
exactly. It's
that
kind of
he.
the opposite. You have to train them not to be that way. A lot of the time.
Yeah, but he's showing something that's like real and just not depicted enough in, well, especially children's movies, but everywhere now you see these kind of saccharine depictions of these like very like ultra intelligent children, like the precocious child who's smarter than the parents and all of that. And I don't know, I'm just like I got no time for that anymore, or if I ever did.
No, yeah, no, it's not reality. I think it's something. And it's also like with Freud and him like trying to talk about childhood sexuality and all the Victorians like having a heart attack. It's like, well, have you ever met a kid? It's like they're not so inhibited and they have sexuality. And it's
Yeah.
like, people have to teach them like it's appropriate to do things here and not there. You can't do this with your friend. You can't do this. Like the parents have to teach them those things at some certain points along the way. But I feel like maybe because I don't have children, like maybe I can still see it, but like maybe when people have children, they like have to put on these blinders because they can't like admit that about their children or something. I don't know, it's too overwhelming. I really don't know, but there's some big like blinder or block that people get about kids in that way in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Do you find
And
it's different in Europe? Because from what I hear in like Scandinavian countries, there's a lot more acceptance and kind of awareness of children's sexuality and things like that, and they're not quite so like shielded from those kind of things.
Yeah, 'cause they're not like super religious. Like my America's like still like it's kind of a religious mindset, whether people are like actively religious or not. Swedes are like very secular, like actually. And they're just like, but this is the science, this is how things work. They're kind of very practical about things.
Mm,
So yeah, I would say definitely. And there's not so much like shame about things like that, about bodies and things like that.
mm. Yeah, I mean, it's like people in North America seem to be so unconscious of its puritanical roots, and it just keeps like resurfacing. Like I wrote this new book on kind of trauma culture and how it's infiltrated the psychedelic revolution, and kind of co-opted it and hijacked it. But I talk about like what I'm calling like the new Puritans, um, who, it's related to like this view of the child and that kind of, it's very Victorian in a lot of ways. It's very
Mm-hmm.
repressed.
Totally. And I didn't even notice it either till I left, or really till I like brought Carl. Like there was a period when I was moving where I like left New York, but I couldn't move to Sweden yet because my residency wasn't worked out. So I spent more time in Florida where I'm from. And like Carl would come and visit me. And like, you're driving down the highway and there's like all these like billboards of like abortion is bad, da
Mm,
da da. And then like Jesus saves. And it's just like you're inundated with them like every couple of feet, it's like one after the next. And Carl was just like, why are they allowed to do that? And to me, it's like, I didn't know that there were places where they didn't do that. So to me, it's just like normal. And then I come to Sweden where there's like literally no billboards. Like they don't put billboards around because it's like littering your view. So it's just like
mm.
forest. And I'm like, oh, isn't this nice? I see. You can live without that kind of, yeah, in your face all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I even noticed that crossing the border down to the States, as soon as you go across, there's like a really significant change, and a big part of it is, yeah, the billboards. They're just like in your face all the time. There's like all this messaging, and I'm like, no wonder Americans are so crazy.
Yeah, it's
There's no
not good.
space.
The advertising and the corporations have really taken over. But you'll have to definitely come on my podcast and talk about your book.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, it should be. I'm trying to get the release in time for Solstice. I thought it'd be a nice time to bring something new into the world, and yeah, so that'd be great.
Very cool. I also
Any
found out a fun
Yeah.
little tidbit about Lock, Shock, and Barrel that I
Uh-huh.
learned was that the voices are Catherine O'Hara, who does Sally. She is also the little witch, and
Oh,
then Paul Rubens is the little devil, who's Pee Wee Herman, and Danny Elfman was the little skeleton boy.
oh, amazing.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either, and I've got a soft spot in my heart for Catherine O'Hara being a
Ugh, I love her.
Canadian Queen of Comedy, I think, and still amazing after all these years.
Yeah, Schitt's Creek was like, yeah,
I
I
know,
love
and
that show.
still like just like a don't give a fuck attitude about how she appears. Like she's not afraid to look crazy or you know. I love
I
it.
love her, and she plays the crazy artist like so well, like in Beetlejuice. She probably, yeah, that's one reason to watch the whole Beetlejuice is just for her, because
Mm.
you have to see what happens to her.
Yeah. Yeah, the wacky artsy. Yeah, now it's
She's so
older.
funny, and
Yeah.
she wants to do like a a funeral for her husband who died, and she has to make it like a performance art piece, and she has to like film herself grieving and doing primal screams and stuff. It's like
Sounds good. Um,
hilarious.
Anything else like you want to say about Nightmare Before Christmas or Tim Burton's work? I mean, I feel like I've kind of touched all the points that struck me, and I love how our conversation has kind of gone down these different avenues.
Sure. Yeah, no, I love to free associate and go on tangents. They all come back around and make everything make sense, I think. But yeah, I mean, I think the main themes in Burton's work in general are definitely like outsidership and helping people who feel misunderstood to f feel like understood in their originality and uniqueness, and you don't have to fit in your own way, which is really important. And he talks about that all the way, to the end. So he still really much feels like an outsider, even though he's like clearly a very mainstream Hollywood successful like millionaire. But he still feels like a weird, awkward artist, and like that he feels like it was all just like a weird fluke that he was even able to do what he's done. So he's definitely not hubristic. I will say in making the Beetlejuice film, he does finally say like, I mean, he's like in his late 60s now, he finally is like, I've just realized that I just need to do things the way I do them, and that's that. So
Hmm.
like, so he's finally like, I just have to do it the way I want, because he had some like difficult experiences along the way with, when you do a film, in the system, of course, there's constantly people telling you to change things. And like with the Batman, for example, I watched an interview with Danny Elfman where he was talking about how that was like the first kind of major theme music that he had done that wasn't like for some kind of quirky comedy. And he really like heard the music in his head and knew what Batman was going to sound like. And there wasn't like a bunch of superhero movies then, so he
Hmm.
didn't really have an idea of like what it should sound like. So he really got to kind of create his own vision. And then the producers were like, "Well, we want you to work with Prince on the soundtrack." And he was like, he's like, "I love Prince, but not for this. Like, this is not what I had in mind at all." And he actually walked away from the project. Um, because he's like, if I work with Prince, it's just gonna be Prince making all the music and me like arranging it to fit the film, and that's not like what I was supposed to do. So he actually walked away from it, and then after like a month or so, they ended up calling him and giving him the job. And so that was also like him like
Hmm.
really sticking with his guns and doing what he thought was right, even though he said that whole month he felt like he definitely ruined his career and like ruined his life. Like, how did I just give up Batman?
Yeah,
But it worked
but
out.
but that's like integrity,
Hmm.
like sticking to his own artistic vision, but which is really just like himself. Like it's all comes out of like who he was as a kid, what he was interested in, these different images that stuck with him, and that coming through in his his art form, which like apparently when he was at Disney, like yeah, he kept drawing everything spindly and spiky and weird, and he just couldn't help it. Like he wasn't actually technically uh proficient enough to overcome that. And so like that limitation actually was formative and is part of who he is. But like I he's 66 now, I think, and like to
Hmm.
just be like coming to that conclusion, like I can't help but be myself and I gotta like stick to my artistic vision, like that's a lot of wrestling. And I wonder if that has to do with like acceptance and fame and the money that comes along with that. I wonder if that made it harder for him to accept.
Yeah, exactly. I think so. I think that makes sense. And yeah, that's the thing. We're learning about all these actors, and the people that Tim Burton works with a lot, like Danny Elfman. They all seem to have a lot of integrity, and they all seem like real artists, which is very refreshing, because I've become very basically, since Carl's daughter took me to the latest Marvel movie, Deadpool versus Wolverine,
I'm sorry, you had to
I've
go through
become
that.
like, I became like really super cynical. Like, really, because I hadn't, I basically saw the X-Men like when they came out in like what, like 2002 or something like that. Like that's the last time I saw an X-Men. I saw like the early X-Men movies and like the first Wolverine movie. It was like early 2000s. So it's been like 20 years. And then and then I saw this, and I was just like, the product placement is like so egregious, and like the plot makes
Mm.
no sense, and it's just like they're literally like the main characters are literally, have you seen this movie?
No, I probably never
Oh,
will.
don't see it. They're literally the main characters are saying like, we're gonna throw this character in because it's gonna make him a bunch of money. And they like bring in Blade and like Mad Max and like all these
Uh,
random superheroes. And they're like, well, now that, Disney bought Fox, we can bring these characters in too because they're
oh,
from the Fox universe. And they're like literally saying this in the
yeah.
movie. And I'm just like, what? Like,
And
what is
it's
happening?
yeah, and it's probably
And
intended to be like super meta, you know.
yeah, it's like for Gen Z, I guess, and like, yeah, it's like an internet, like
No
it's like the
fourth
internet
wall
has
anymore.
become a movie, has become the internet, and they're like commenting on it in the film itself. So I've just been
Mm.
like, yeah, like really, like, seriously, is this what's happened? But this kind of like, yeah, I was like, okay, I just have to watch the things that I like and resonate with, and the artists that I resonate with, and it's nice when I do a deep dive into those artists to see that they're actual artists. And that's
Yeah,
really refreshing to see because I was getting very cynical in that regard.
yeah, like David Lynch. Like I love how he just said it's like, someone was asking him like about his smoking and like why he loves smoking so much, and he said, "Well, I don't know. Smoking to me is just part of living the art life." I love that. Just like living the art life. And
Mm,
that's the life I want to live too. And that means like living a life that's beautiful to you and that's your life is filled with things that feed your soul. Which has nothing to do with like what's going on, maybe nothing to do with what's going on um currently in pop culture. Like my wife and I, we find it really hard to watch any movies made past like the 2000s. Like I love watching movies like shot on film, no cell phones, or if they're cell phones, they're like so kind of old and bulky that it's just kind of cute. Um,
mm,
but yeah, I tend toward those kind of films. It's easier on my eyes. There seems to be like kind of more space. It's less kind of self-awareness in that kind of
mm,
meta way that you see so much of now that I don't know. I think like because of the internet and kind of millennial humor and stuff, like I think a lot of young people are like kind of what would you say, like kind of irony poisoned. Like it's just
mm.
like irony on top of irony on top. And we're Gen Xers. I mean, we kind of like irony was a big part of our kind of culture growing up, but it's just gotten like kind of piled on and to something that I find so kind of cynical and flat.
Yeah. And then meta, like you said, everything's like too self-aware.
Right,
Yeah.
self-referential.
Yeah, exactly. It's super self-referential. That's what this movie was too. Yeah, and I don't like watching films where like people are like on the computer. I'm just like, this is not interesting to me.
Yeah, or like
I
you
just
see the
want to
tech,
see a story.
yeah, the
Just
text
tell me a
bubbles
story.
coming up on the screen all the
Yeah,
time.
I
It's like,
can't watch it. I can't watch it either. I'm with you.
well,
Another thing I will say though
yeah,
about Tim Burton, and I think that's really cute that runs through a lot of his films, including Nightmare Before Christmas, is like the Frankenstein idea.
mm,
And apparently, like the first movie he ever remembers seeing is Frankenstein in 1931 with Boris Karloff. And it's so funny, Carl and I rewatched it to prepare for this class. And there's like and when I was watching all these interviews with Tim Burton, he's like, I make everything very unconsciously. He doesn't like conceptualize ahead of time like what things are going to be and like try to put all this symbolism. He just like, he lives movies, so he just like likes to make them in this kind of very free associative unconscious process way and then understand what he did after he puts them together and watches them, which is
mm,
very psychoanalytic, like also in Lacan light. It's like they call it après coup. It's like you understand what you did after the fact when you look back at like what you just did.
hmm
So that's how you start making sense of it. And that's kind of how he works. And he always says like, just when I think I'm done with a certain symbol or prop or aesthetic, then I'm like especially like the dancing skeleton or the hanging skeleton. He's like, I put skeletons everywhere. Like just when I think I'm done with them, I'm like, what would look really good there? Like a skeleton hanging, like a
hmm
skeleton that comes to life. So you'll see this over and over again. And then when we rewatched the Frankenstein film, not only does the theme like he did Frankenweenie and of course the Dr. Dr. Franken, what's the guy in Nightmare Before Christmas? It's not Frankenstein, but it's Franken something. Anyway,
Frankenfurter.
Finkelstein, that's what it
Oh,
is. Dr.
Finkelstein.
Finkelstein
Okay.
makes Sally, of course. There's a lot of this kind of Frankenstein and his monster characters.
Well,
But
Edward Scissorhands was a
Edward
Frankenstein. Yeah.
Scissorhands, exactly, with Vincent Price making Edward, and Vincent Price, of course, was one of his like heroes. Um, but when we went back and watched Frankenstein, the original film, there's actually this scene where the doctor's in like an anatomy class teaching the students at Frankenstein school,
Mm.
and like one of the somebody like walks by and bumps the skeleton that's like hanging there, and the skeleton starts bouncing like this, and like all the kids in the class start laughing at it. And I'm
Wow.
like, that must be where he pulled this kind of like bouncing skeleton from.
Interesting. Yeah. And that's just kind of a cool image in that old film too, like that it's kind of a prelude to animating the monster, right? So
Mm-hmm,
the skeleton kind
totally.
of inadvertently becomes animated. Yeah. And Burton also, he grew up in Burbank, and I think he's mentioned that there's a lot of big Latino population there. So he grew up around the Day of the Dead celebrations and seeing all
Mm-hmm.
those sugar skulls and skeletons everywhere too, just like implanted in his psyche. And yeah, amazing to just like it's in there and to see it come out through the creative work. Yeah, there's something like very interesting about that. Like, is it ever something to be fully analyzed, understood, and resolved, or is it just something to notice? What do you
I like
think?
it being just noticing, especially with
Mm-hmm.
artists. Like, I think psychoanalysis is great, but I think it's great when artists just make art and don't need to be psychoanalyzed because they work through things unconsciously by making what they make. And yeah, you don't want to analyze it. And he also says a lot that he doesn't like overanalyzing things. He
Mm-hmm.
just likes to make them, and he wants to make sure they feel a certain way, that the feeling is what is important to him. Um, and if other people want to analyze it, they can, but he's not really interested in that. And I prefer not to overanalyze things, like with art in general. Like when I go to museums, I don't like to read on the wall about the things first. I like to walk around the room and like see what resonates with me. And then if something seems interesting, then I'll read about it. But I like to get the feeling of things first as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something like if the artist was to fully try to analyze the symbols that show up in their work, to understand, like, okay, maybe there's a fixation on death. That's why the skulls and the skeletons keep reappearing, and the kind of the darkness and all of that. Maybe that like cuts off the creative supply that those images are the source of.
Exactly. You don't want to do that. Just make great art.
Make great art, and then like appreciate art without trying to interpret it to death.
Please.
Yeah.
Everybody in society, please.
Please. I know, stay away from the wall cards in museums. They've gotten even worse because they're not just like giving you the details of the piece, its medium and date and all that, but there's like some kind of political
They're
interpretation on everything
explaining
now.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're explaining it from a modern lens that's not reality. Like I went to the Edward Munch Museum in Oslo, and Edward Munch was working a long time ago, and there's like one painting he made of like a girl who looks like probably like 12 or something, and she's sitting naked on a bed, and someone like wrote this whole thing about how he was identifying with like the anxiety of this girl and her like developing body, and like how he like somehow identified with that. And I'm like, I don't think so. I think you're really reading into that. Yeah.
Yeah, project much?
Yeah, I'm like, no. And I even also I went to this
Well,
wonderful
because
exhibit.
what that would be more acceptable than him idealizing the young girl's figure,
Yeah, exactly. Or
or
maybe
just
it's his
or
kid.
just
Who knows who that
representing.
person is?
Yeah, we're just representing it as a stage of life,
Yeah,
as part of
exactly.
nature. Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Why can't he just be painting what he saw?
Yeah, we got to
You
turn
know?
him into like an autogynephile or something.
Yeah,
It's
it's super
bizarre.
weird. Or even in like I went to this great exhibit called the Femme Fatales in Hamburg. It was fantastic. They had like every kind of like magical witchy painting that has ever existed in this
Mm.
one building, like the famous like Lilith and Circe, and like just like so many iconic images. And then I appreciated having them all there, but they actually kind of like their art speak like didn't address the fact that these were witches. They were all women who had been demonized by like the male gaze or whatever.
Mm.
And like I was like, okay, maybe they were, but they were also witches, you know? Like, and why can't they be witches and be powerful in that way? You know what I mean?
Well, I felt like, what is it? Waterhouse. Is that he's got
Yeah, exactly.
these beautiful paintings of these witchy women, and to me, it's just like it's romanticizing that. I didn't see it as being demonized. I mean, they're gorgeous. It's like you want to step into those scenes and be
Live
that woman.
there. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, well, man, I find I think your takes are very refreshing. Maybe it's because I'm also a Gen Xer and we're looking at the world through the same kind of critical lens or something. But I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think you're probably like me, a movie hound, and I love talking about films and talking about these different psychological themes that come up in them because, yeah, they're more interesting and more engaging to me than sometimes the old myths that all the Jungians go to again and again. I'm like, well, look at what's going on now. There's like incredible material here. Um, so it'd be great to do this again sometime.
Totally, anytime. It's super fun. And I totally agree. It's like they're like the new myths. So
Yeah.
let's deep dive into them. And I would absolutely love to have you on Rendering Unconscious as well, anytime, whether your book comes out or whenever is a good time for you.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, tell people about your work. So you've got a podcast that's looks at things through a lens of psychoanalysis, right? And then you do a bunch of work with Carl. You guys teach together and have a Patreon?
Yes, we do a lot of stuff. So, yeah, I started my podcast Rendering Unconscious in January of 2018. Actually, in that period, like when I had left New York but couldn't move to Sweden yet, I had like a full private practice and doing events at museums in New York. And then all of a sudden, I was like at my mom's house in her spare bedroom. I turned 40 and I was like, wasn't I like a great psychoanalyst in New York, like jet setter? What happened? How did I end up in Miami in my mom's house, you know? But it was only temporary, but I had not a lot to do. So I thought, ooh, it just came to me like maybe I could start a podcast and start interviewing people I know because I know a lot of interesting people. And so I started focusing on like psychoanalysts, but then of course I have a lot of artist friends and magical friends. And so I basically interview all different kinds of people. And I just like to showcase like different ways of looking at the world and different viewpoints. And so people can kind of open up their mindset because I'd say that most of the audience are like grad students and like the grad school like psychology is like very narrow-minded.
Hmm.
So I'd love to like open up people's worldviews and see there's lots of different ways of thinking about things. And also like for psychology students, you don't have to abide by the DSM. There are many, many,
Hmm.
many therapists out there who don't buy into the DSM. And so so there's many ways of working. So I like to show many ways of being in the world. Yeah, and I have the Patreon with Carl, which we started where we put exclusive content every week. We do this thing called Magic Mondays, where we take turns writing about basically what we're doing that week as far as like anything magical that's happening, like if there's a full moon and I do a little ritual, or Carl and I do something together, or Carl often writes pieces that are more like theoretical. We just kind of write about magical and creative practices and how to show people how you can do things in your day-to-day life. Like
Yeah.
magic doesn't have to be like going to a Gnostic mass and putting on this big performance. It can just be like before I started the podcast with you, I lit a candle and like I have
Yeah.
my little altar here and just like create a
Hmm.
nice space. So
Nice.
just like doing things like that. So we do that, and then Carl's put up all of his films and lectures on his Substack, which is amazing, including he just recently got this material that he edited together and like fixed the video and the audio for this like old interview that LeVay
Yeah.
did that had never been published. So I think Carl's Substack's amazing. I also have one, but mine does not have all the stuff Carl does. It has a bunch of lectures that I've done that aren't available anywhere else. And we would put them on Patreon, but Patreon doesn't really have a good way to put up video.
Mm.
So Substack we found is really good for hosting video stuff.
Cool.
Um, yeah, but yeah, that's what we're doing, podcast. And yeah, I'm a therapist, I'm an analyst, so I have a private practice and I see people remotely from I have people in Vietnam all the way to California, and that's really great too. I like
Right
to work
on.
especially with people who are creative and
Yeah.
magical so they can talk to someone openly about their magical practices without their therapist thinking they're loony.
Yeah, I'm so with you. And yeah, we have so much in common. It's great. So I'll definitely come on your podcast and you come back and we'll talk more movies and all kinds of stuff. Look forward to it.
Sounds good.
All right. Take care.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Brian.
Bye bye.
Bye.